How important is it for us to have these conversations in 2019?
Important? Well, if we do not do it, we will continue to have those silent chambers facing it day in and day out and nothing be done for them.
Yeah, there are conversations around it, but probably not as much as we would like. But I'm glad the conversations have begun. And I hope in 10 years from now, this is not a topic at a panel. I hope, I hope 10 years from now, it's not an issue anymore where we have to address it and talk on.
Where it's just common sense. It's a way of living. It has to be natural. These are things that have to come naturally to all of us. Can we talk about body language at the workplace? And I think this is something a lot of people have been talking about recently. After the entire Me Too movement kicked in, something as simple as knowing what is the right touch and the wrong touch. Can we please talk about that? Very specifically to the workplace.
There is no touch.
There's no touch at all.
As per the law, there is no touch. Okay? So you can go into a workplace saying, hey, you know what, I'm really good friends with this person, and so what if I hug that person? All right? So someone you don't really know very well comes and sees that behavior and hugs you too, and then you say, no, this is not right. Where do you draw the line? So as per the law, I'm sure everyone should be aware, there is no touch.
Is this just in India or across the world?
Since she mentioned the law, right, it mentions even a connotation which has a sexual connotation is against, it's going to go against, it can be taken as an offense. It is already an offense. Okay. A connotation is an offense. Touch is a physical part which is crossing many borders. It is a big offense. So
forget being physical, just speech is...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anything, even sexual lewd remark, a joke which is sexually charged, somebody saying to somebody, you're hot, everything. You're not allowed to do that kind of stuff.
Shalini, would you like to add to that, or...
I mean, I think they're more, subject experts in this matter. But of course, I think venture capital and entrepreneurship, as an industry itself, has gone through its own shares of conversations around this, right? I think it could be to do with women entrepreneurs getting funded, conversations around why are they not enough. We see women VCs in the industry. So there have been a lot of conversations around it, right? And but of course, things are changing and it's not been what it was before. But, like I always say, we see women, we see roles have probably been what, say, medicine or engineering was to women 30 years ago, right? And I think it's slowly becoming an industry which is accepted for women to have as a profession. So you're seeing more and more people coming. But of course, there are different kinds of, I don't want to use the word harassment, but yeah, something of that sort where it's like, not enough women are getting funded, and, how do we ensure that there's opportunities for all? And so I would call it more like mentally or harassed. A lot of people feel that, but it's definitely better than before, because as in when you see more and more women coming into being in VC and become investors, they ensure that women are getting their share. But when I say that, it's not because that person's a woman, but at least gender is not a criteria that's taken into consideration when you're making an investment decision. So because a lot of them are like, oh, you fund, 2 years later she becomes a mother, can she manage between the house responsibilities? But to be honest, I've also seen that within our own portfolio companies, men have also had founder splits and stuff like that for different reasons, and some of them are family reasons. So it's really surprising that nobody talks about it, and they only talk about women having responsibilities at home, and that's why they can't pursue entrepreneurship. But it's not, it's also applies to a lot of men with pressures that come.
All right, so we're going to talk about how easy or how difficult it is to get laws in place in startups very specifically. And if you could talk about government organizations and give your 2 bit about it, we'll start with startups. How easy or difficult is it to have these conversations and to put legal rules and ways of doing things at work?
I think when you're talking about sexual harassment at workplace or sexual harassment in the context of investing, I don't know what you mean, but I think the laws in workplace is very similar to what would apply to any other workplace. Talk about any corporate setup, I think the similar laws apply to something like this. But then there are cases where, you hear conversations on, an investor, a male investor made a pass at a female entrepreneur, right? And there's also like very fine line between what is okay and what is not okay. Like I have to tell you, this is really funny. Especially in valley-based companies or say in Southeast Asia, right? It's very okay to catch up for a drink, right? And I know one of my investors, male colleagues, was saying, hey, this portfolio company, she would say, hey, I'm too tired for a coffee. Why don't we just catch up for a drink? That's easier, right? And then he's saying, is that okay that she asked me that question? Because if I asked her the same question, it's not considered okay. So what's okay and what's not okay, right? And I think a lot of it is very, like a very personal thing on how you perceive it, right? And what's not okay and what's not okay. And it's a very personal thing. But yeah, it does exist for sure. But the thing is also, the man or the woman has to use better judgment to make sure, they're within the limits, I guess. But if you're asking me if there are laws around it, I don't think there are laws per se, but yeah,
there are laws?
Like they are the experts, they can probably say more. But I'm sure in workplace setup, there are a lot of laws around it.
Okay. Could you add
No, of course there are laws. The sexual harassment of women in the workplace 2013, there's a big manual, you can read up on that. Every company that has more than 10 employees, that act applies to them. So even if it's a startup and it has 10 employees, that act applies to them. There's a bunch of things you have to put into place. There's sexual harassment in terms of physical, verbal, body, bunch of things. You have to conform. And what I've noticed now is the younger companies are actually doing more because they are more aware, they are younger, they are very involved in the conversation, some of them are woke, and they're involved in trying to get the trainings done. I have conducted over 500 workshops in the past 1 year, so it's definitely happening, at least with the younger companies. I feel the most stalwart companies have been doing them. There's a mindset issue in a lot of companies where it's done, it's a tick mark. Whether it's implemented and whether the leaders are actually making sure that their behavior demonstrates the kind of behavior that has to be applied in the workplace, I'm not so sure. Also, I don't think there are gray lines where somebody has to use a judgment. There are things which are right, there are things which are wrong. And right now, I think it's better to err on the side of what's right than to make a decision based on your judgment, simply because the atmosphere is so charged, and it's very important for us to swing the pendulum this way before it gets back to normal.
Okay, to add on to what she said, since you mentioned the laws, there is something called Vishaka Guideline. It's freely available online, and there are two points to it. One is, laws are always there, but it requires implementation, and this Vishaka Guideline requires sensitization, and it also mentions, with all these Me Too happening, we have something called a new power of consent. Right? I'll come to that. Vishaka Guideline is something which men needs to have on their fingertip, not women. Right? So sensitization needs to go till that level. Men needs to be aware what is an error, where is it happening, where are the lines to be drawn. Now let's come to the power of consent. Consent means yes, no. If there is an yes, and there are still a question of power involved. A man in power asking a woman to go to a drink. And the woman says, yes, it is not a consent. The moment the power steps in, the consent doesn't work. It works for both the sexes. Obviously, these are the areas we need more sensitization to have the right implementation of the laws, but this is exactly what we are working towards.
So this would work the other way around. If a woman was in power and if there's a man working subordinate to the woman, that would be wrong?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The question of power will decide consent.
Okay. And how is this being implemented in government offices across India?
Okay, indespicable. Right now, I can only talk about the one that I have seen. They are more aware than any of the corporates that I see. They take updates on WhatsApp, and they are very aware of these lines that they should cross, what are the areas that they should address, and what not to be done. So men over there are more sensitized than women, and I expect every man to take it on their own responsibility and know the Vishaka guidelines at their fingertips.
We're sort of going to diverge into a slightly different subject. So I'm going to talk about me for now. When I was growing up in college, in school, and this is something we talked about backstage, it was okay for us, sort of okay for us to talk about women in a certain way. We'd also talk, we'd use words like, that's so gay. And now we realize using terms like that isn't cool anymore. It's not right. It's not ethically right either. So things are changing for men. But at the same time, where do you think, or how do you think men should get educated at a time like this to sort of learn how to deal with these situations? Because peer pressure is so much. Peer pressure is so much that we don't know the difference between right and wrong until someone throws it in our face. How do you think it can happen in a place like India where there are so many people?
Beautiful. Yes, you start.
You're laughing because I'm a little afraid to ask these questions, but please.
I'm laughing because I don't know why people should be told how to behave well. I just don't understand it. Like, don't you understand that this is wrong? Like, I mean, how can you talk about women and victim blame and victim shame and talk about the way they dress and think like she's up for it and all that stuff, which is locker room talk and what they call like
Right.
boy talk and the bro club and stuff like that.
Right.
I mean, I think this is old fashioned, and I think if you have any sensibility and awareness about how the world should be, you should know that this is wrong. And the reason you don't know is because people have never stopped you and you're socialized to think it's okay. But if you have the slightest inkling of how the world should be and you pretend to be woke, then you better walk the talk. So I don't think it's rocket science. You know what's right and what's wrong. Imagine like, and this is what victim blaming and victim shaming leads to, is that when a woman gets raped, oh, she was drunk. The first thing that happened in that Uber case was, she was drunk. What do you mean she was drunk? What about the rapist? And why do you put the onus on the woman that she was raped? Why isn't it that the man raped her? Like, the language has to change. The way we approach things has to change.
Well, something as simple as when you mentioned no touch at all at the workplace, that sort of surprised me because I come from the entertainment industry where touch is a regular thing at all times.
And as per the law, it's not allowed.
Exactly. So I didn't know that until I sat on this panel with you. So how can people like me, even forget the rural areas, people in the urban cities, how can we have access to all of this? What is the most effective way to get it across
It's
to
out
us?
there. It is
Okay.
out there. I mean, if you have been following the Me Too movement and you're an ally and you want to understand what you're doing wrong, read up on the Vishaka guidelines. It's very simple.
Vishaka guidelines.
It's called the prevention of sexual harassment against women.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called the prevention of sexual harassment of women. It's 2013 Act. Read it up. It's all over the net. Every office was providing training for gender sensitization. Every office is by law required to train you on sexual harassment. Every office. If they have more than 10 people, they are required by law to undergo, to get its employees to train about what sexual harassment is, what constitutes sexual harassment, where the committee is, who is in charge of the committee, how to approach the committee, the confidentiality around the committee. It's all there. If you don't know it, your company is doing you a disservice.
Absolutely. I would want to add on to what you
Yes, please.
said.
Yes, please.
Demonetization seek liya, GST seek liya, you'll learn how to be good. It's easiest.
Something as simple as that. All right. On that note, would you like to add any finishing notes?
So one of the things that happened when people were talking about sexual harassment globally, right, in the last 18 months or so, I'll tell you how things played downslide for women. Okay, men stopped including women in a part of their lunch break talk. Right, they're like, oh my God, I don't know if we should have like women hang out with us anymore. And then I also remember that there were certain VC meetings where, like, if a male investor was assessing an opportunity which had a female founder, they would have another female sitting there. Who's their employee, to say, almost like to take notes or whatever, saying nothing happened, right? I mean, that's really bad. But that happened, and I'm not sure if it's still happening, but I know it did happen that time when things went really down south. So I think as we're evolving, I think men or the ecosystem itself, right, has to have set guidelines on what's okay and what's not okay, and not really being cut out. I also remember that when these maternity laws came out with 6 months, people stopped hiring women. They're like, oh, for a key resource, I'm not going to get a woman because I have to give her 6 months off. So I rather get her for something non-important because it's replaceable and I can fire her. It's really hard and it's not fair. So.
I'm just going to quickly add to that. Firstly, I think people who say that kind of stuff are cowards. Okay, there was a whole article, I don't know if you read that, about this Wall Street investment banker who made these horrible comments about how he cannot go out with a woman alone, how he's not going to hire women. This because they love their toxic culture, right? Change for them is so tough. Like, oh my God, now I have to change the way I am. No, I'd rather just not go out with women. That is the coward's way out. That is somebody with a fixed mindset who's not willing to grow. And if you really want to grow and you really want to be part of this world, you have to change, you have to adapt, and you have to learn that we are 50% of the population. You better learn how to deal with us.
Yes. Okay. Cream rises to the top, so does the froth. Right now, what you see is just the froth. Good that it's gathering. It will get segregated. It will be out. And it will become a hygiene factor. We don't have to form a panel like this and talk about it. It will be a part of our system. That's a good way of putting it.
When do you think this will happen? Any idea?
According to the World Economic Forum, equality is 100 and something years away. If the World Economic Forum, first they said 40 years away, 160 years.
Yeah.
It was 40 years some time ago. I don't know, it's not happening in the century apparently. It's up to you men to make the change.
It's up to us, men. All right, can we have a big round of applause for this fantastic panel?